Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into two Java keywords that, well, they pop up a lot. var and final.
Yeah, you see them everywhere now.
Exactly. Maybe you've used them, maybe you're just wondering what the big deal is. Our mission today is to cut through the noise, understand what they are, why they matter, and how they work, based on insights from Java's var and final, a beginner's guide.
Right, sort of get to the core of it.
Yeah, we want to unpack how these tools can help you write cleaner code, safer code, maybe more modern-looking Java code, too.
And hopefully give you a better intuition for using them.
Absolutely. Maybe even uncover some aha moments along the way. Ready to sharpen that coding sense.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting right at the beginning. What exactly are var and final in Java? Let's break them down.
Okay, well, let's start with var. This one's a bit newer, introduced back in Java 10.
Right, JEP 286, wasn't it?
That's the one. It's all about local variable type inference. Basically, it lets you declare a local variable without explicitly stating its type. The compiler figures it out for you.
So instead of typing out, say, string name John.
Exactly. You can just write var name John. The compiler looks at John, knows it's a string, and infers the type for name. Simple as that.
That sounds convenient.
It really is. But there's a key restriction. var only works for local variables, inside methods or loops, and they must have an initializer right there when you declare them.
Ah, okay. So no class fields, no method parameters, no return types?
Nope, none of those. It's strictly for initialized local variables. The main goal is really to cut down on boilerplate, especially when you have those super long, complicated types.
Like lists of maps of entries or something?
Precisely. Think list map.entryString integer. Typing that out is a pain. var makes it much cleaner.
Okay, that makes sense for var. Now, what about final? And I hear people sometimes mention val, too. What's the story there?
Right, good point about val. First things first. Val is not standard Java, not in the current versions anyway.
Oh.
You'll see val in other JVM languages. Kotlin is a big one, where it means the variable is immutable, read only after initialization.
So like a constant reference.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
In Java, we achieve that exact same thing using the final keyword.
Ah, okay. So final is Java's answer to val.
Exactly. If you write final string name, John, you're saying name gets assigned John once, and that variable name can never be reassigned to point to something else.
Locks it in.
It locks the reference. We'll need to talk more about what that means for objects later, but yes, it prevents reassignment. So, maybe a simple analogy. var is like a shortcut, letting the compiler do the type guessing for you. Final is like a padlock, stopping the variable's value, or rather its reference, from being changed once it's set.
Okay, one for conciseness, one for immutability, basically.
Love the gist of it, yeah.
So we know what they are now, but why? Why were they introduced? What problems were developers facing that these keywords actually solve?
That's really the crucial question. The main drivers behind both var and final are all about making code better. We're talking improved readability, easier maintenance, and enhanced safety.
And importantly, without breaking Java's type system, right?
Absolutely. Critical point. Java remains strongly typed. var doesn't change that one bit. It's compile time inference only.
Okay, so for var, what are the specific benefits then? Less typing?
Less typing, yes, reducing that boilerplate we mentioned, but also arguably better readability in certain cases. When the type is really obvious from the right-hand side, like var user, new user, removing the explicit type declaration can actually help you focus on the variable's name and its purpose.
Okay, I could see that.
It just makes the code feel a bit lighter, maybe more modern, aligning it with practices you see in languages like Kotlin or, TypeScript.
Right. And final, why use that beyond just defining PI?
Well, final is huge for safety and clarity. Ensuring immutability is vital, not just for mathematical constants, but for configuration values, maybe settings you load once and never want changed.
Things that shouldn't accidentally get overwritten.
Exactly. And it's incredibly important in concurrent programming. When multiple threads might access a variable, making it final simplifies things a lot, because once it's safely published after construction, threads can read it without worrying about its value changing underneath them.
Ah, thread safety. That's a big one.
It is. Plus, using final signals your intent very clearly to other developers or even your future self. It says, this isn't supposed to change. That alone prevents bugs.
Okay, so they seem pretty powerful for simplifying and securing code. But I'm always interested in the magic behind the curtain. How does the compiler actually handle var? And how does it enforce final? Is there any Like runtime cost?
That's a great question, and the good news is for vars type inference, there's zero runtime overhead. It all happens during compilation.
Okay, I know.
So when the compiler sees var, it looks at the expression on the right side of the equal sign, the initializer. It figures out the exact type of that expression.
Like if it sees new arrayless string, it knows the type.
Precisely. It determines the type is arrayless string. Then in the bytecode it generates, it actually replaces var with arrayless string.
Ah, so the running code doesn't even know var was ever there.
Exactly. It's purely a compile time convenience. The resulting bytecode is identical to if you'd written the type out yourself. No performance penalty, no loss of type safety at runtime. And critically, once that type is inferred, it's fixed. You can't later assign, say, an integer to that variable if it was inferred as a list.
Got it. Compile time magic. What about final then? How's that enforced?
Final is also checked at compile time. The compiler makes sure that a final variable is assigned a value exactly once.
Only once.
Only once. Either right when you declare it, or if it's an instance field, it must be assigned in the constructor, or a static field in a static initializer block.
Right.
Any attempt to assign it a second time, that's a compile time error. You won't even be able to build your code.
So it catches mistakes early.
Right. And for final primitive values, like final int count equals 10, the compiler in JVM can sometimes perform optimizations, like inlining the value directly where it's used. A small potential performance boost there.
Okay, but you mentioned a nuance earlier about final and objects.
Yes, this is super important and catches so many people. When you have a final reference type, like final list string names is new array list,
Uh-huh.
final only guarantees that the variable names will always point to that specific array list object. You cannot make names point to a different list later.
Okay, the reference is fixed.
The reference is fixed. However, if the array list object itself is mutable, which it is, you can still change its internal state. You can still call names.addBob or names.remove0Roberto or names.clear. Final doesn't make the object itself immutable.
Right, that's a huge distinction. Final protects the variable assignment, not the object's contents necessarily.
Exactly. That's probably the biggest point of confusion around final.
Okay, so the compiler does a lot for us, ensuring safety. But, every tool has its potential downsides.
Yeah.
Are there any traps or pitfalls we should be aware of when using var or final?
Yeah, that's a really important point to raise. While they're great, using them without thinking can cause issues. Let's take var first.
Okay.
The most common complaint is reduced readability, if it's overused or used inappropriately. If the type isn't immediately obvious from the initializer, like, say you have a var result, customer service.getSomeDataAid.
Yeah, what is result there? You don't know without looking at the method signature.
Exactly. Someone reading that code has to maybe navigate to the method definition or rely heavily on their IDE just to figure out the type. Sometimes being explicit is just clearer.
So context matters a lot.
Hugely. There's also the limited scope, only local variables with initializers. And a more subtle issue can arise during refactoring. If the return type of getSomeData changes slightly, maybe from list string to list object, var will happily compile, hiding that potentially significant change.
Oh, that could lead to weird runtime bugs later.
Potentially, yeah. And inconsistent use within a team can also make the code base harder to navigate.
Okay, pitfalls for var. What about final? What are the potential downsides there?
Well, the main problem with final is inherent in what it does. It enforces immutability of the reference, which means inflexibility.
Can't change it later.
Right. If you declare something final and later realize you do need to reassign it, well, you have to refactor. It forces you to think carefully about whether something truly shouldn't change.
Which can be good, but sometimes restrictive.
Sometimes restrictive, yes. And then we absolutely have to hammer home that object mutability confusion again.
Right, the final list example.
Yeah. People expect final list string to mean the list can't be changed at all, but it only means the list variable can't point elsewhere. The list itself can still have items added or removed unless it's an actually immutable list type.
Like list.of.
Exactly, like
Yeah.
the ones from list.of. That confusion is a real pitfall. Also, sometimes initializing lots of final fields in a constructor can feel a bit verbose, maybe a bit boilerplatey itself in complex classes.
Yeah. Okay, so definitely things to keep in mind. Given all this, the benefits, the mechanics, the pitfalls, what's the practical advice?
For someone learning Java, or even experienced devs wanting to use these well.
Right, boiling it down to practical tips. I think for beginners especially, it's about using them thoughtfully. Understand the why. For var, the guideline should be Use it when the type is crystal clear from the right-hand side.
Like var message, hello, or var stream files.lines.
Perfect examples. The initializer makes the type obvious. But if it's not immediately obvious, maybe err on the side of being explicit for clarity's sake. Don't make your colleagues hunt for the type.
And what about using them together? Can you do final var?
Absolutely, and it's often a really good idea. Final var user, get user BI'd, gives you the conciseness of var plus the safety guarantee of final. It clearly says infer the type, and by the way, this variable won't be reassigned.
Best of both worlds, potentially. Often, yes. For final itself, the advice is, use it whenever a variable's reference should not change after its initial assignment. Think constants, configuration, method parameters you don't want reassigned within the method, though that's a style choice too. It signals intent and prevents bugs.
Makes sense. What else?
Definitely clear up the val misconception. Know that final is Java's tool for this. And with var, good naming becomes even more crucial. Since you're omitting the explicit type, the variable name needs to clearly communicate its purpose. Var customer list is much better than var data.
Good point. The name has to carry more weight.
It does. And always consider your team. Does using var here make the code easier or harder for someone else to understand quickly? Balance conciseness with clarity.
And for the final object issue.
To get true immutability for collections or objects, you need to use final together with an inherently immutable object or collection. Use final list string names, lists.of_a_b. Now, names can't be reassigned, and the list itself cannot be changed. That's the full package.
So combine final with immutable types like string, integer, or immutable collections.
Precisely. And maybe a final tip. Start small. Try var in a simple loop. Use final for a configuration constant. Get comfortable before you sprinkle them everywhere in complex code.
That's really solid advice. So summarizing, var offers conciseness when types are clear. Final provides safety by preventing reassignment. Both powerful, but need that thoughtful application. Okay, before we wrap up, what's one final thought you want to leave our listener with?
Well, I think in essence, var and final are really valuable additions to the Java language. Var definitely streamlines local declarations via that compile time inference, making code less verbose. Final is Java's way of enforcing immutability for variable assignments, like val elsewhere. Used correctly, they absolutely improve code quality. But the key is that used correctly part balancing the benefits against potential readability issues or inflexibility.
Absolutely. And here's something to chew on. How might deliberately, thoughtfully integrating var and final into your regular coding habits change things? Not just making your own code maybe cleaner or safer, but how could it impact the way you collaborate? How could it improve shared understanding and efficiency within your team, maybe leading to more robust, more maintainable software overall?
That's a good question to ponder. It's not just about syntax.
Exactly. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into var and final. We really hope you feel more informed and maybe more confident about using these tools in your next Java project. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.